like thinking about the fade out, because you might hear it if you're paying attention to it, but that drum fill is so distracting that it makes it sound pretty natural. There's a string quartet that every time you like watch a cartoon and like Mr. Burns is like having a meal with his really long table, there's always like bum 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 bum, and I don't remember what it's called, but I really wanted to put a reference to that in here, so I did. Fade outs, you want to avoid using fade outs as much as possible because they're always a little bit of a compromise. Acoustically, the most sound thing that we can do is have things start right on their attack, right, not with a fade in, and end with a natural reverb tail.
Hello and welcome to another FMOD deep dive. Today we're talking to my friend Noa Beazley, who aside from being a very talented composer in the indie game space, is also a teacher at the Berklee College of Music and one of the directors of the community Boston Game Dev. Today we're going to be breaking down a music system that Noa created for a game jam at the start of her career, and it's full of really interesting insights. In particular, I'd love people to pay close attention to the way Noa transitions her music from one game state to the other, as well as all the insights she gives in terms of knowing things in hindsight, all the features that she wish she had known about in FMOD back then, and now we're using it as a very useful exercise to reflect on what could have done better. Super useful for anybody who is just starting out. If you are currently learning about implementation and FMOD in particular, then I have a gift just for you. All you have to do is send the message that I've put in the description below this video directly to me and I will send it to you. Literally, copy the message in the description of this video, direct message me with it on LinkedIn or Airwiggles, and I will send you the lesson for free straight to you. Okay, that being said, let's jump straight into this deep dive with Noa. Hi Noa, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I've been doing well.
Doing all this small talk and pleasantries beforehand. Like we haven't just been having the small talk.
We did. We had about 10 minutes of like, it's snowing here, it's not snowing there.
We both wish we had saunas built into our homes. Yeah, absolutely. All of the usual conversation. Great. So today we're going to be talking about FMOD, and you have an interesting project to show. It's something that you've been showing to students a lot, and do you just want to talk a little bit about why you've been showing this for educational purposes, you could say?
Sure, yeah. So if you're not familiar with my background, I'm a composer and a professor at Berklee College of Music. So I teach kind of the main composition courses there. And we have a course that really focuses on FMOD and specifically how to compose for kind of implementing into middleware. So I really like to show this project. There's a couple of reasons I like this project. First of all, it was for a game jam, so there's kind of no NDA issues there. I don't have to ask anyone's permission to show it. The reason I like showing it is that this was kind of the first project that I did where I really explored some of the deeper music functionality of FMOD. So I had put stuff into the timeline before and kind of had really basic transitions and fades and stuff. But this is the one where I was like, oh, I know that FMOD can do cool things, so I just want to explore that. I think it'll be a good thing to show today because there are some things that I would do differently. Things that I think that if it's your first time using middleware is how you might implement it. So it'll just give us a chance to show some of the cool stuff I discovered about it, but also talk about some pitfalls that you might have if you're not used to the way of how you have to think about exporting things and writing things if it's going into FMOD.
That's great, because it's a really common question, even when students ask me, like, how do I export this music? What's the best export practices to put it in FMOD? And I like to think we can get away with a lot more now in middleware, thanks to how powerful and versatile they are. But awesome. I'm very excited. Let's get into it.
Okay, so this is kind of a stealth-based game with sort of a retro jazzy kind of feel. So what we're looking at right now is we have kind of a stealth track here. I'll explain what these things are, why these are kind of sticking out here, which is one of the things I would do differently. But we have a harpsichord track here that fades in and out based on your proximity to a specific room in the place that you're in. So you can see up here, there's study. So proximity to the study will fade this harpsichord layer in and out. And then we have a really short track here for you're being chased. And then we have a wind stinger and a lose stinger. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do this either way. I can kind of talk a little bit about more in depth what's in here and then play the music, or I can just start by showing the system and then kind of deep dive into what I'm doing exactly.
I think hearing the system in practice would be a really great place to start.
Okay, great. So I'll just play it and just kind of pay attention to what I'm doing with these parameters here. So I'll play through a little bit of the gameplay. We'll go into being chased. We'll go back into the gameplay and maybe back and forth a couple times. Go further and closer to the study. Counterintuitively, 100 is kind of like further from the study. So think of it as like 100 meters or 100 feet, and then 0 is like you're in the study. You're 0 feet away from it.
And
Then
what are we
yeah.
doing? Who are we in this game? Like, I just realized that, what's the premise of this game?
Yeah, we're playing a little raccoon who's kind of like bumbling around, stealthing around, trying to just grab as many things with your two hands as you can, and you're breaking into this really fancy house where a dinner party is happening.
Love
So
it.
so detected will go from false to true, which will bring us here into aggro mode. Win state will be it's either we're playing the game or we've won or we've lost, and then we have that study proximity. So yeah, let's take a listen. Okay, so that's pretty much all of the stuff that can happen to you in the game.
I love it. I love it so much. Like I said earlier, like I was just excited to have this conversation so I could listen to your music again because I can picture this little what do you call them?
Like a raccoon, yeah.
Running around trying to pick things up and just it's so like Pink Panther, right? Anyway, fantastic. I love it so much.
It was super fun. It was really, really fun. Okay, so I'm going to start from pretty basic, just in case you're just getting started with FMOD. So the kind of very basic first thing that we can see here is that we have our level music right here, and I'll zoom in a little bit. These green lines are quantization lines. So basically what they're saying, and we'll look at where that's coming from. What that's saying is wait for the next beat until you make that transition. So we see here we have our tempo, and we have different markers for different sections of the level music, and more on that in a second. So, okay, I'll start with a little bit of background about these quantization lines. Up until that point in FMOD, I had been using transition flags, like specific places where it's saying, oh, if you pass this point and your parameter has changed, transition somewhere else, right? So we would do that by saying add transition to aggro, right? So what this type of flag is saying is, okay, I'm playing. When we get here, check to see if we're in aggro. If we are, go to the aggro section. If not, just keep going. What I did when I started this was I said, okay, I want to have this flag check every beat. And so I made a flag for every beat to check if we are going to aggro mode. This was an incredibly tedious exercise, and what I eventually discovered is that you can have this transition region here, which is a very basic function of FMOD. I just didn't know that that was a possibility at this point. So I made what's called a transition region. So you can make a transition region to aggro. So you can take this and you can kind of put it on any area you want. And what this is doing is it's constantly checking, right? It's not waiting for you to pass a specific place to say, oh, am I in aggro here or am I in stealth mode? It's just the second we go here from detected, we're not detected to detected, as long as I set up my parameter correctly here, it's going to take us there. The next thing I discovered is it's possible to have that region, but also have it check every bar, right? Without having to put a little marker on each one of them. So that's right here.
Which saves you putting on like 100,
I did. There's a lot of copy pasting involved, but it looked extremely messy. It was so tedious, and there's a much easier way to do this. We can see here to aggro. I said, okay, every beat I wanted to check, and if we've passed it, when we get to that beat, if we are detected, go to detected mode. And you can change this to whatever you want. You can make it half notes, you can make it eighth notes. You can do it every couple of bars, right? You can say every 8 bars, I want you to check. So I think it's important when you're choosing your quantization interval to think about the gameplay mechanics, right? If you're playing a stealth game where it's really, really, really important to telegraph to the player right away if someone has detected them, you don't want that interval to be too big, right? So it's possible that musically every 4 bars or even every bar is kind of the more consistent thing to do, but they've long been detected and caught by the time you have reached 4 bars, right? On the other hand, if I was working on a game that was, say, a point-and-click adventure game, and we see these in the old Monkey Island games, right, where there's a really cool system with the iMuse system where you can kind of like wait until the end of the phrase until you transition to the arrangement of the different place. Really cool. But the reason it works is that when you're playing a point-and-click, you don't have to react right away if something has changed, right? So it can wait for the end of the phrase and tell you, okay, you're in a new location. That's not super, super important information to give to the player, and so you can make it more musically coherent. So it's always kind of a give and take between how responsive you are and how musically coherent things are. Here, I'm definitely more on the side of the scale of responsive because every quarter note, that happens very often. You're not waiting too much to transition, and it kind of lands that drum fill right on a beat. So I just found that was kind of the best in between being a little more musical, but also giving that player that information right away. So that's the first thing I discovered, is that you can have these regions and that you can quantize those. So just to show you, the regions aren't enough to go to the place, right? You need to actually like set the parameter, right? Say what has to happen for us to go to this place. So you can add a condition here and say what is the detected mode, and so you'll get this, and you'll say when detected is true, you're going to go here. So as long as detected is false, and you're somewhere where it's checking to see if it's true or false, it's going to stay here on stealth. When you turn it to true, it's going to go here to kind of aggro mode. So the next thing is looping. This is a thing that I would do differently. So if you haven't really used middleware before and you have delivered assets for developers to put into the engine, you've probably done some kind of export trick in your DAW to make it so that the loop loops perfectly, right? And typically the way that we do this is we take the reverb tail and we tack it onto the beginning and then export it that way. So that when you get to the end and you go back to the start, you hear the reverb tail from the end over the start when you go back. The big downside of using this method is that you get that reverb tail when you start the track for the first time, a reverb tail that came out of nowhere. So it's not perfect. Middleware pretty much just eliminates the need to bake in any kind of reverb tail or do any of these methods for making a perfect loop. So basically, when you're exporting things for middleware, you really just want to make it as independent as possible, right? So if you have kind of a transition, just export that transition with the reverb tail ringing out. right? If you have a track that loops, just export it from beginning to the end of the reverb tail, and you'll take care of all of that in the middleware. It's really nice because you don't get downsides like the reverb tail in the beginning, but also you make everything a little bit more independent, right? So at the beginning of the aggro track, for instance, I have this drum fill. Actually, let's to make it true. Okay. Right? That's baked in here, and it can only ever go to the aggro track. And so if it were independent, I'd be able to kind of use that as a transition however I want, right? But because it's kind of part of the track, I've determined for myself this kind of rigid context in which it needs to appear. So I'm trying to make things as modular as possible. And you can see here kind of the same deal with the reverb tail. You can see that what I did here is I cut the beginning and I baked it into the end. And I made the loop point start at the point where I cut the beginning and the beginning of the... It's just so many extra steps that I did not have to do. Actually, I'm going to double click on this and you'll see that nothing happens. Newer versions of FMOD have now made it... This is kind of, I opened in the version of FMOD that I made this in, where the loop region, it can't have a transition. But these days, in the newer versions of FMOD, when you double click on this, you get the same thing that you'd get if you open a transition region, and you can just overlap the end and the beginning.
Sorry, like this is exactly the reason why when I started using FMOD, and it was with the same version, surely, I preferred to use destination transition markers and destination markers because you could add that transition region. So it was like a workaround. But yeah, of course, now they've added it to the loop region as they should have.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I did too after this, when I started, before the new version of FMOD, but post me wanting to be able to loop in FMOD. That's what I did too. Yeah. So basically, you have one of those transitions here at the end. It takes you to the beginning and you tell it, to overlap them. But way easier nowadays.
But what you did works is the other thing. It's like, okay, there's an easier way. It might always be an easy way, but you still made it work, which I think is also a plus. That there's, especially in FMOD, there's definitely more than one way to get what you want to achieve.
Yeah, totally. And it works, and it is pretty seamless because you don't have that reverb tail in the beginning, right? The beginning still plays independently, and I just kind of cut it up and did that in FMOD. But yeah, there is an easier way. So I want to take a look at the transition timelines for a sec, where you'll see I'll talk a little bit more in detail about this drum fill and how I would have done that differently. So if you're not familiar with transition timelines, this, in my opinion, is the coolest thing about FMOD, right? It's my absolute favorite thing about FMOD, and it's really, really easy to use and just easy to make sound really good. So you can see here, if I go to aggro, you see we have this little timeline that's opened up. And so basically you can drag out the destination and you can drag out the source and you can put fades over it, right? And you can control this fade and make it any way you want. Fade outs, you want to avoid using fade outs as much as possible because they're always a little bit of a compromise, right? In the real world, when an ensemble is making music, there's no one kind of with a fader just turning it up and down, right? Acoustically, the most sound thing that we can do is have things start right on their attack, right? Not with a fade in, and end with a natural reverb tail. But unfortunately, sometimes we just are in situations where we have to fade out, right? There are ways to avoid this, tedious ways of exporting things where you can always kind of have the reverb tail. But if you want to have something like this, which is just kind of a long track where at any point the player can transition, you're going to need a fade out. But when you have something distracting like a drum fill or a cymbal swell, it can mask it. So like let's just take a look at this transition again. Right, you're not really thinking about the fade out because you might hear it if you're paying attention to it, but that drum fill is so distracting that it makes it sound pretty natural. What I would have done differently is, again, this kind of drum fill, I would have just exported it separately with the reverb tail playing out and just dropped it right here in the transition timeline, which is a thing that you can do, which is really cool, to just make it a little bit more independent, rather than what I did, which is basically the same thing as here, which is tack it onto the end and have the loop region kind of find it where I made that edit.
I kind of agree with you. Like transition regions are so useful. Like the fact that you can throw in anything in there. You could throw in command instruments, snapshots, whatever you. It's like a mini timeline, really.
It's so cool. Yeah, it's really intuitive to use for sure.
Amazing.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah, a couple more things. So to show you that what's happening with the study proximity, that's here in this parameter. You know, I made a new parameter, study proxim. We go here and I can, so what I did was I added automation to this volume knob here. You do that by right-clicking on any volume knob. And you can't see it because I already have it, but here it'll say add automation. We can see this automation here. And just like in the, you know, the fades I was showing you, it's really nice. You can kind of choose exactly how you want it to work. So let's just start the music and take a look at what's happening here with this fade curve. So this is something that's very deceptive about FMOD because it looks so much like a DAW. You could be tempted to think of this 0 as the start and the 100 as you know, the end. But this is not a measure of linear time, right? This is just showing you at any point we can be 45 away or we can be 0 away or 100 away. So don't think of this as the beginning and this is the end, right? It's just kind of measuring an interactive element. So pretty simple, right? We just have that volume automation and it gets louder when you're closer and it completely is faded out when you're far away from it.
That's actually a good point as well, because like, so you were just in the parameter sheet and although it looks synchronous, it looks like there's a timeline like this, like the timeline sheet here that we're in now.
Or,
and
sorry,
you can also add, you can also add audio. So it's kind of a little bit confusing. It's like, what are you, parameter sheet? But
yeah,
you're absolutely
well, it's
right.
not. Yeah. What it isn't is a timeline from you know, I mean, it could represent seconds, but you know, if it's representing speed or like number of potions or how close are you to something, but you can have like a linear piece of, it gets really messy. It gets really messy, but you know, it's just a specific way of thinking about it that you have to mentally do. Okay, cool. So so we have that study proximity parameter. Win and lose are really simple. We just have another one of those. We have another separate parameter from that. You're either in the gameplay, you're winning, or you're losing. I set that to every half note. Aggro, it's really important to know if someone's chasing after you, but if you've won or you've lost, you don't have another action that you can take, right? So it's okay if it waits a little bit longer to a place that's a little bit more musically coherent. So you're constantly kind of making these decisions. You can also see here, it's a quarter note to go back to stealth because you need to know immediately if you know they've stopped finding you. But every bar for win and lose, just because the tempo here is doubled, so every bar happens like pretty frequently. So think about the tempo you have, think about how quickly you need to give the player the information. All of these are important factors.
I've also noticed something that I really want to ask you about, because obviously you have 3 transition regions over the main track, which is fairly straightforward, lose, win, or jump to the aggro. But obviously in aggro, you have so many more paths to get back to the main loop. I wonder what your thinking was there.
So what I did here was I said, there's kind of 4 distinct sections to the stealth track, and it kind of modulates all around. And pretty much every time it modulates, it gets to a new feeling section. So what I said was, wouldn't it be nice to have a system where I could randomly tell it to go back to one of these, right? So all of these are points where I know it's going to pick up the music and feel coherent, right? Like the beginning of a new section and not the middle of a phrase. So I'll just play the beginnings of these sections so you'll see what I'm talking about. Obviously, that's the beginning. We didn't modulate there, but it's kind of the new beginning of that cycle. Then here's C. Right? Every time that starts over again, I kind of have a new section, and then finally D. Okay, So I had to do a lot, a lot of research to kind of figure out how to make a system like this. But the way I'm doing it is I'm using FMOD's probability feature. So you can see probability is on for each one of these. For stealth A, it's 25%, B, 33%, C, it's 50%, and D, it's 100%. And so you might be asking like, oh, well, how does that work, right? Why are they all different probabilities? Doesn't that mean they're not equal? And so to understand how this works, you need to understand how FMOD kind of thinks of logic tracks. And what it does is it'll kind of go top to bottom when it's checking them and give priority to whatever is on the top. So, and then it sort of like knocks it out one by one when you have a chance, when you kind of introduce chance. So we're not winning, we're not losing, we're down to our four, two stealths. It's checking. Okay, are we in stealth? So when we're thinking about two stealth A, right? At this point, we have four candidates for different places that it can go to. If it doesn't pass that 25% chance, we're on to stealth B, and stealth A is like no longer an option. It's out of the picture, right? At the point that we're in stealth B, it has a 1 in 3 chance of going because it's 1 of 3, so we have 33. If stealth B doesn't get kind of taken, we're down to stealth C and stealth D, so 50% chance that it'll go to stealth C. And finally, if it didn't go to stealth C, stealth D is like, okay, 100% chance it'll go to stealth D. This is a kind of counterintuitive system. It took me a moment to wrap my head around it when I was researching it. But this is the best way that I've found to have a couple of different entry points that you can go to randomly.
I mean, yeah, it makes so much sense when you lay it out. Okay, maths is not my strong suit either, but it makes sense to think that, yeah, when you start at the top, it's given the priority, but you don't want to give that more focus than the other three options. You want to give them all equal option. But yeah, because it's a top-down
exactly.
system, right? The hierarchy that I guess not many people pick up on unless they have to make a system like this.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes when I'm helping students like troubleshoot projects, this has actually taught me a lot about FMON and how it works. But they'll be like, oh, like I understand why this is transitioning to this place. I wanted to transition here, and the reason is that they put the thing that's less important above the thing that's more important in the logic tracks, and you can kind of fix that by switching them around. So if FMON's kind of acting weird and you have a bunch of stuff in your logic tracks, think about the order that they're in and if that is maybe what's causing the issues.
This is something that people can see in the Celeste project as well, right? With the dialogue system, I think we were
I
talking
haven't
about.
really looked into the dialogue system there, but how does that work?
If I'm remembering correctly, because it's been a while since I've looked at it, they had a series of, in order to make the dialogue more fluid and natural, and it jumped per syllable, if that made sense. And they had a logic system with transition markers. So it's just like this, like stack of like 10 transition markers at each syllable, working with a
Oh,
similar
cool.
logic that you've just shown here.
That's very cool.
It is, and so is this. So is this. I love the idea of using logic tracks. They are logical if you think about it. They're called logic tracks, for goodness sake. So when you really think about it, it makes sense.
Yeah, there's a ton of cool stuff that you can do with them for sure.
And I like the fact that you've also thought about like a really common issue, which is like when we're jumping from one loop to another, we always go to the same point. And if we're always going to the same point, and if the transitions happen frequently in the gameplay loop, you're going to fatigue the player because they're always listening to the same start, maybe the start of the track more than any other part of it, right? Because they keep going back to that point. But
Totally.
you've picked out four different possibilities now, which just makes you've extended the life of your music, right? With such a simple system.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. And I think something I would have changed in retrospect, again, all the things I would have changed I would have modularized it more and exported things just as kind of single blocks with kind of reverb tails. I think what I would have done in retrospect is export each of these as a separate audio file with the reverb tail playing out so that you can get kind of a clean start on each one of them. Because Stealth B right now, it has that reverb from Stealth A baked into it, right? So all of these, there is a little bit. There's a little bit. Actually, I didn't put a fade in there, which is interesting. You kind of catch a tiny bit of the of what came before it because you can't unbake it from the mixed track. So exporting these each separately and kind of checkerboarding them is something I could have done to make that a little bit more clean. But yeah, I agree. I think, sometimes I play games and I'm like, oh, I'm so sick of hearing the beginning of this track every time I go somewhere. And it's another kind of byproduct of thinking not linearly, right? Don't think of this as just the beginning of the track. It's also the middle of the track, and it's also potentially the end of the track, right? This track exists in kind of like non-linear time. And so it's kind of arbitrary that this is the beginning, right? Any one of these could make sense as the beginning, and so it gives you a lot more variety to start at them.
Have you done something different in each of those stealth transition regions then?
I don't think so, actually. I think it's pretty straightforward. There's just, so I could see the inconsistencies of the past. Another thing I would do differently is just chuck that fade. Don't do fades unless there's a reason to. I have a nice kind of tail here that fades naturally fades down to 0, so there's no reason to have that. But yeah, basically it's the same thing for each of them, right? I have a kind of a short fade out I would say if you kind of look closely, what you can see is that the fade out is kind of correlated with the whoosh in. So as the whoosh gets stronger, the fade kind of fades faster, and so I have this kind of convex reverb tail. So most of that fade is kind of happening here towards the end. And so, yeah, we can just listen to that. They're all the same thing because they're not really that different. You just have that whoosh, you have that short fade, and then it goes right into the destination on the beat.
Yeah, but play it anyway because it's great and I want to hear it again.
Okay, cool. So you really can't hear that fade out, right? Because the whoosh is so distracting, right? So here's a place where I wouldn't want the fade to be long. I kind of I want it to be over. I want it to kind of be exactly correlated with that symbol coming in.
And it works so well. It just sounds so natural. It's almost like the whoosh works better going from like an intense loop to a less intense loop rather than the other way around. I don't know why. Maybe it's just the attack and release of the whoosh.
I can't remember which talk it is, but I saw a really interesting GDC talk. I'm not going to remember which one it was, but because I want to give credit to the person who was talking about this, but it's this idea that when you're in danger or you have to react to something, your heart rate kind of immediately goes up. But then when you go back into being kind of not in danger anymore, it takes a while for that to wind down. Which I don't know. I don't know if I can apply that to this super short cymbal swell, but I think that might be part of the reason that like it works better to have something alarming be really immediate, and then something that's kind of like winding down be a little bit more gradual.
100%. Something I showed at when I was at Game SoundCon doing a couple of workshops for FMOD, it was too many workshops. Anyway, when I was there, one of the examples we were showing was how, jumping exactly what you have here, pretty much. What you're jumping to an aggro loop or a more intense loop, it wants to be like more instantaneous, right? Because like the threat is there. You don't want to like delay it and then the player's already dead because they didn't have time to react. But on the way back down, we had like pretty much the same thing that you've got here, like 4 or so transition regions, each finishing off the bar in the music that you're in currently. So if you're on like the second beat of the bar, then the transition that would activate is one that is 2 bars long. Or if you're in the first beat, then it would have 3 beats worth of transition, all to make you feel more musical because you want it to feel more natural and slower because you're kind of playing into the narrative, which is lowering in intensity, right?
Totally. And I think that ties into what I was talking about before, where it's like, how fast do you need to give the players that information, right? And you want to not delay too much with giving them the info that they're safe. But if you think about that situation, like, first of all, they don't have to react anymore if they're not being chased, right? Like they're done. So it's okay if they feel a little bit on edge and you have that, the 3-bar transition or 4-bar transition. because it's okay. They don't have to react to something. And so the cost of them being kind of alert and then alarmed is not that high. It just means they're stressed when there's nothing to be stressed about, as opposed to like not being stressed when there is something to stress about.
You've also done something brave, which I think is brave anyway, which is modulating your music. Because everything I've always been told is careful when you modulate music, especially in adaptive music, because it's trickier maybe to make it work, or whatever. But obviously this works and is a killer track. And I've also
Yeah,
noticed, yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
no, that was yeah, go ahead, please.
No, I kind of disagree with that. As okay, it can be tricky if you're working with things like musical stingers, for instance, and you modulate. That gets kind of annoying because you have to have like a version of the singer that's going to work in each one of the tonal centers. But I think it's so limiting to say like don't modulate. And it's one of those kind of pieces of conventional wisdom that I just really don't agree with. I think in some situations it's true and it gets too messy to modulate, or it can be a little bit too distracting. But I think in a genre like this where it is kind of goofy and campy, I think that I think it adds to the music, and it's just very limiting to not be able to modulate anywhere.
It's actually a really good point to think that I feel like technology is now catching up with what we are allowed to do, especially in game audio, because it's like that never ending like warning, like saying like don't use too much processing, don't use too much memory, because we need to keep the memory usage down, the budget, the CPU budget. But in retrospect and interviews that I've had with other people, they've thrown a ton of live processing in there and nothing's happened. The game has shipped, nobody's complained.
Yeah.
And again, now with things like FMOD, you can create a system like this, which is so elegantly simple, really, in the grand scheme of things, once you understand everything, obviously, that now we can modulate music. Like there's no reason not to, right? I feel like the technology is helping us.
Yeah, I feel like that's the problem with conventional wisdom in a field that changes so rapidly, And I think it's important to respect the conventional wisdom and kind of see where it came from and ask where it's relevant and where it might not be relevant anymore. But yeah, you always there are just ideas that seem to kind of like float around forever, and I think it's important to kind of every time someone gives you advice or tells you, oh, you can never do this, it's important to just do some research. I mean, the processing thing, like it is there totally is truth to that. Like you never want to mix anything that you could have otherwise like mixed in your DAW in FMOD, for instance, right? You don't want to use like an EQ in FMOD to get an annoying frequency out of your oboe or something, right? Because that is a waste of resources. But it's important to not be black and white about it, right? Because I think we are seeing really cool stuff now that like machines can handle more processing going specifically to the audio. We're seeing really cool stuff with like generative audio and MIDI and compressing stuff in real time where that you can't bake into the track. So just like everything, it's nuanced, right? And it's important to kind of know why you're doing what you're doing, or why you might not want to go with the conventional wisdom.
On a really, really basic level, and this is not something to live by, but I like to live by two things, which is when I'm doing game audio, which is does it sound good and has it broken the game? So if it sounds good and it hasn't broken the game, then generally speaking, you're probably fine. Generally speaking.
Yeah, that idea of if it sounds good is really freeing, I think. And I think it's easy to get caught up in like, oh, there's a very, very specific way you have to do it, especially in like the world of live recording. I think there are reasons for that, but if you look at like Reddit or you go on different Discords and stuff, people can be really, really kind of harsh about exactly how you're supposed to do things. But yeah, if you do something and the result is good, then it doesn't matter what the kind of iron rule is, right?
100%. Could not agree more. And I see you've also made use of the tempo markers, like the BPM markers. You have two in the middle, which are catching my attention. Do you want to explain what's going on in that part of the track?
Yes, I would love to explain what's happening in this part of the track. So let me see. God, I can never remember the name of this string quartet.
Oh.
But there's a string quartet that every time you like watch a cartoon and like Mr. Burns is like having a meal with his really long table, there's always like bum, 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 bum. And I don't remember what it's called, but I really wanted to put a reference to that in here, so I did. So that's my biggest like music nerd moment, and I was like, it's just gotta be a bar of two in there.
I love that so much. It's so good.
I'm glad you asked about that.
For sure. I remembered from last time we spoke about it. I was like, I've got to remember to ask about that cool moment in the track. And again, really nice use of the fact that we can put BPMs and time signature changes wherever the hell we want. I mean, there's kind of a reason why it's there, so they can be used. So again, there's no excuse not to make our music intricate and more complex, you know?
I mean, I think the most important thing is for it to be musically coherent. And I believe the same thing with using like, harmonies that are a little bit more out there or modulating, or if you have a justification for it in the music, and that's just the way it needs to be musically, your player is going to accept it. It's like if I arbitrarily wanted to have in a bar of 2/4 because I thought that it's cool, probably I wouldn't get away with it. But there's a very specific musical reason for that here, and I just think our ears are very forgiving for that made melodic sense, or that made just sense. And like here, there's like a little bit of a phrase that like interrupts it, and so it needs to be cut short a little bit. I don't think it's too distracting, just because it's what serves the music the best.
Fair enough.
Oh, one last thing I wanted to mention is that when you're thinking about parameters in your games, you want to be thinking a little bit more like a developer. And you don't really want, I mean, this isn't true in all situations, because sometimes you want to do something a little bit more sophisticated. But for the most part, the parameters shouldn't be about what's happening in the music. They should be reflecting what's happening in the game, right? So your job in the middleware is to take this information from the game and translate that into how is the music going to function, and how do I do that with all of my fades and transitions and all of that. The information you want the developer to have, this is stuff that is easy for developers to understand, right? Detected, false. We're not detected. Detected, true. We're detected. Win state, are we winning or are we losing, or is it game? So when the developer gets this from you, you want them to be able to just plug this into events in the game as easily as possible, because they don't know. So I think study proximity is the easiest one to show this with. This is kind of a distance, right, for the developer to use. I could have called it harpsichord fade in, right, which is what it's doing in the music. But if you're a developer and you get a parameter that's like harpsichord fade in, what does that mean, right? When is the harpsichord supposed to play? And like, what does it mean for harpsichord to be 100 or for harpsichord to be 0, right? So you want to just make sure that it's as self-explanatory as possible and reflecting things that are in the game. And you also want to think about that when you're thinking, do I want this to be a continuous parameter, or do I want it to be a kind of a discrete parameter, right? Where it can be labeled. So you're either in gameplay, or you're winning, or you're losing. Or maybe it's a true-false statement where it's either true or false. Study proximity is a spectrum, right? It's like how far are you away? But sometimes I see this where it's like, oh, when detected equals 31.5, we go into aggro mode. It's like, the dev doesn't know what that means. It doesn't mean anything for something to be 31.5. Just make it true or false and save those continuous parameters for things like speed or time elapsed or something that makes sense on a spectrum.
Amazing. I have no further questions. You've explained that so eloquently and diligently, and this was great.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, so I think I'll close it up if you don't have any more questions I think I've pretty much covered everything here.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else. Honestly, everything's been really well explained. So yeah, cool. I just want to finish by saying thank you very much.
This was a delight. The week in class where I show this is like my favorite week because it just gets everyone excited about FMOD. It's just a really cool program, and I was saying this before, but I really appreciate you making this series, because when I was looking up stuff and kind of pasting my markers one by one, I really would have appreciated having a video like this.
I can't tell you how many times I've replayed this video just to listen to Noah's music again and again because it's just so good. I hope you gained a bunch of insights from watching this. And remember, if you are currently learning implementation in FMOD, please send me a message with the description below and I will get back to you with a free lesson. Aside from that, I will see you in the next FMOD deep dive.